Esther, thank you for being on the Leadership Lounge. We've obviously known each other for a long time. And you're really good friends with my wife, and I'm good friends with your husband. I wanted to have you on to kind of talk about the perspective of being a young female in business and working your way up in your career, and just kind of how you came out of your past and where you are now, and just kind of like a lot of encouragement that you could give to others in that. So thanks for being on.
Thanks for having me on. I'm so excited.
Yeah. So I always like to start from the beginning. So middle school, high school, and then into college, what did you want to do? Maybe you didn't know. And then what interested you, and talk about that journey.
I thought I was going to be a psychologist or some sort of like sitting down and listening to people's stories. I love being around people. I love getting to know people. Even when I meet someone new, I'm always like, what is their deepest, darkest secret though? Like, like I want to get to know who they really are. Yeah. So all growing up, I thought I wanted to do something in the field of like getting to know people better, which I think kind of connects to me now because I still get to know people on a deep level, just on a different side, maybe not the emotional side, but more of like their goals and dreams of building businesses and creating whole companies and ideas. And then I got to college and thought I was going to be a middle school math teacher.
Yeah, I remember that phase.
Yeah, no. It was really hard, first off, but it did not. I got to my senior year and realized it just wasn't the field for me. There's a lot in teaching, a lot of things have changed. So kudos to any teachers out there because it's a hard field to be in. Yeah. And then I graduated and didn't know what I was going to do because I couldn't use my math degree for anything. So I either had to go and study further or find a job doing anything that I could do just to make money for the time being. So I ended up working at Wood Forest Bank as a teller. They wanted someone to be bilingual, and I was bilingual. So I was like, I'll do this until I figure out what I really want to do. Yeah. And it was a really small branch, and I was the only employee other than the manager.
Oh, I didn't realize
that. So
I
worked open to close for like 30 some days straight. Which again, I wish I could go back and tell myself, be like, this will pay off one day. Like that drive and that motivation to want to succeed is going to pay off. Yeah. Even at that level, like I already knew that I'm like, whatever I'm going to be doing, I'm going to do it at my best. Cause someone will notice eventually, right? It pays off eventually. And then.
And really quick. Because a lot of people, don't know you personally, and I do. That's one thing I really respected about you from like a very, like knowing you through college and stuff. Is like, even when you worked at Taco Bell, you're like, oh, it's so much fun.
Oh, yeah, I love working there.
And I think that perspective of finding the good in the enjoyable parts of like any job is so important when you're going out and finding a career. Because I always say, if you're not happy in little, you're not going to be happy in much. No. And it's like, people always think, oh, another job or this or that is going to make me happy. But I think finding contentment what you're doing is so important. So.
And it affects your everything all day, right? We spend so many hours at work.
Yeah.
Why are you hating yourself at work? Yeah. Like, try to make it fun. Try to find the joy while you're there, Yeah. At least you're getting a paycheck. That's a lot more than a lot of people can say. So.
Yeah. So you're at Wood Forest Bank. You're bilingual, and your parents are Dominican. Correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. And then I was born there. My brother was born there, and then my parents were very young when they had us. So they moved to the U.S. to go to college and start a whole new life. They were dirt poor. Yeah. Like dirt poor. When we went back in 8th grade, we saw where they used to live, and it broke my heart. And we're not even growing up. We were still also very poor, but not that kind of poor where it's like you're sleeping on dirt at night on a concrete because it's so poor. And then they moved here for a better life. They lived in a really rough side of town because, again, they didn't have much. So they went to college and then had my brother, I think it was their senior year of college, my youngest brother, and then moved to Indiana because my dad got a job.
Yeah. Did you at all feel like, do you feel like that was a massive advantage coming from your parents being immigrants here? Do you feel like that's helped you in your career?
I think it helped me have drive. When you have nothing and you have to work for everything you have, and just watching my parents have full-time jobs, but also study for a bachelor's degree with 3 young kids. I mean, I'm speechless. I just can't imagine going through all that and growing up with that instilled in you where it's like everything you do from this moment forward, you have to work for. Yeah, I think it's innate in me now. It's like part of my blood.
Yeah. So working at Wood Forest, you're bilingual. How long are you there? What did you learn from that experience?
So I was there for a year, and then I got engaged and moved. So yeah, I learned so much. Oh my gosh. That was the first time I think I learned that I could do anything, because I started out as a teller. I was just doing it to get a job, and then fell in love with connecting with people. I knew that I liked people, but I really realized in that role how much I liked interacting with people day in and day out. And then I learned all the back stuff, like the systems and learning regulations and how to balance the vol, all of those things. I'm like, these are all things you can just learn so quickly. Like someone just tells you, you practice it and you do it. And I thought I didn't have the skills to do that early on. I'm like, I can't be a teller. I don't know anything about banking. Yeah. So going into that role, I realized, okay, maybe I really can, I don't have to go into the specific field and get a master's. I can just go to anywhere and learn it and do that. So after I realized that, I had to move, and I moved to Muncie, but they didn't have a position available at Wood Forest for me to move. Yeah. So I actually applied. I don't even know if anybody remembers this back then. I'm sure a lot of people don't, but I don't know if my manager remembers this, but I applied to be a manager actually at a Wood Forest branch, because that's the only position they had available. Yeah. I made it to the final round. And they were like, we love your energy. You'd be so great at having your own branch, but you just don't have the experience. Yeah. And I remember being shattered. I'm like, but I can learn it. I learned how to be a teller. I can learn to be a manager. So because of that, I had to find a different job. And through connection, so I actually knew the head of the retail team at Star, because I used to bank at his bank before he moved there. I reached out and I was like, hey, do you guys have a job? I need a job. And he had one available for me, so I was able to move over. That was in 2015.
Yeah, because Wood Forest, for people, maybe you can describe it. It's more of I think it only exclusively exists in Walmarts, right?
Yes, I think there's only one standalone, and it's at their headquarters in Texas or something like that.
Yeah, so you're not dealing with any sort of B2B. No, it's very much you're dealing with your normal residential,
everyday type. Yes. And in the market that I was in, it was very low income. Yeah. So it was very, very specific. Our goals were crazy. I remember you had to open a ridiculous amount of accounts a day, because that's really what was important. It wasn't, there was very little business needed to be had. At least at that time, it might have changed. But at that time, it was very much about, we would seriously go out and go to, seriously go to the people working at Walmart and be like, hey, do you want to open a checking account? And I remember doing that. And now I'm think nothing. I think oh my gosh, I had the guts to go do that. But it just, again, at that time, it was I just wanted to succeed. I'm I don't care how I have to do it. I will go up to you while you're picking cherries and be like, let's go back and open an account right now. Or actually, you don't even have to give me your ID and I will open it while you're shopping.
Yeah, that is such a good skill to learn. There was somebody, really famous business person, who said, everybody should do door-to-door sales, just because it you gets you used to hearing no, and then you're strategize, and you have to get that callus and that thick skin.
Yeah, you get desensitized to the word no. I'm okay, what's the worst they say is no? Yeah. Great, I'll move on. There's 500 others.
Have you always felt pretty motivated by goals set for you, or have you set a lot of your own goals? I'm going to get 10 today,
that's a good question. Both. Okay. I am very much about wanting to please and succeed and be I want to be the best at everything I do. So I always do internal goals, but I also succeed in a place that has goals for me, because I know what you're expecting. And then I can not only exceed my own goals, but also exceed the goals that you have for me. Yeah.
So you transition, you go to Star Bank, and then what are you doing there?
So very similar, not quite as direct as salesy, because I'm now behind a teller line. It's a standalone branch, already with really good reputation. So they have people coming in on their own. So I didn't have to do quite as much salesy on this one. And I also gained a couple skills. So I was able to do more personal loans, be more involved with that, car loans, which I didn't really do much.
Is there any sort of training or certification you need to be able to process loans, or basically are you just the facilitator that goes to an underwriter and then
yeah, there isn't really any. There's some training, but not really. No.
And through that process, when someone comes in for a car loan, typically when I think about a car loan, someone goes to a car dealership and they do it there. Mm-hmm. What information are banks asking for? Is it just a lot of personal finance stuff?
They just want, really they just want to know you're going to pay it back, right? Credit score, how much money you have coming in, how much of it is going out on bills. That's essentially, if you boiled it down to what they're looking at, that's what they want to know.
I think there's a place for credit scores. I think a majority. I think they can be so skewed.
Oh,
so
sure.
Like when I up until like a few years ago, I have like a perfect payback. Like I've never missed a payment on. I think there was like a Menards card or something I forgot I had and missed a payment or whatever.
Okay.
But like I would have employees that have like a credit card they put $1,000 on and they have like an 800 credit score, and then I've paid back like $250,000, $300,000 in like loans, and my credit score is like a 690. You know, I'm like, how is this accurate?
Yeah,
you know, and I agree. I think there's like especially in the loan world, but I guess there's really no other way to quantify it.
I know. That's why I'm like, I agree, but there's no alternative. Like, I need to be able to know what you've done. And the good thing is that if you're, depending on where you go, you're able to take that into account, right? Depending on what underwriting team is looking at it, you can explain yourself, but there's nothing else for us to look at to see people's history.
Well, yeah, I think, you know, we're talking about loans now, but I remember when I applied for a mortgage the first time.
Okay.
This was probably 7-8 years ago. I had like income, but not great. But because I didn't have a W-2, they're like, we can't. Yeah. Sorry. Like,
so basically, you make nothing.
Yeah, yeah. Essentially, to them, they're like, you don't even have income.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, but you just approved a mortgage for my employee who
I pay with my company money.
I think if you own your own business, you should be able to bring your employees' W-2s.
Yeah, to prove that you have enough money.
Like, hey, look, they've been paid for like the last 2 years. You should give me. And then,
yes. Yeah, there's so many things in the back end. I mean, seriously, working in loans for the majority of my career, there's so many things. And I'm like, there is no precise way to do it. And we're doing it for what works for the majority. But there are outliers like the situation where it's like, it doesn't really benefit you though.
Yeah. And I understand having to have like some sort of rigidity to the rules because I know there's like discrimination laws and like all these different things. So I completely understand that. But it's like, you know, it's just me and my friends who like own businesses. Like, how are our employees buying houses? We can't buy a house. You know?
I know.
And it ended up working out. Eventually, like, I learned a lot through that process of getting letters from, you know, different vendors and stuff. You can build essentially like not like a booklet, but you can build essentially like a portfolio of like, hey, these are my finances, like, and this is how you can build up some sort of case. But if you just talk to that first level loan person, they're like, I don't know.
You're not going to get it. Yeah, they're like, you should go home.
Yeah.
You're like, no, we can dig deeper.
Yeah. So you're at Star, and how long are you there? Are you enjoying
a year? So a year seems to be my magical number.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was there a year, and then I don't know how much I'm allowed to tell about this story. Okay. So I don't know how honest I could be.
You can be as honest as you want.
Okay. So your wife actually introduced me to the church that you guys were going to at the time. Yeah. And because I just moved back to Muncie, and I was trying to find a home church because I was getting married. Yeah. We were going to stay there for a while. So we end up starting this church, and then through that, you know, create a community as you should and as one does. And who is now one of my best friends, her husband worked at a company. And just naturally conversation, you know, you get to talking and what do you do? What are your skills and how's work and that kind of conversation. And then I think he might have asked you, I think he asked you guys about me and was like, so would Esther be a good hire? I have a position available. Yeah. And your guys, she's the best person I've ever met is what you said. So
that's exactly what we said.
I'm just kidding. So you said some great things about me, which I will never be able to repay you for.
No.
And then I think maybe we talked about it after in like a casual conversation, him and I did. And I did my first interview with him, came in, met the team, met the CEO, and moved over in August of 2017. Yeah.
And so basically you moved over to Flagship Bankable, which is a non-for-profit that does primarily micro SBA loans.
Great organization for small business owners.
Yeah. And really a great team. Adam's interview will be on here. I interviewed him earlier today.
Oh, you did?
You just missed
Oh my gosh. Oh, I'm so sad.
But talk a little bit about what you did there, and then, you know, what you learned. I think that's probably where you honed a lot of your sales.
Oh my gosh. I grew up there. Like if I had to pick, if you're thinking of careers as also compared to life, like that's my hometown. That's what I think of at Bankable. I started there with no experience as far as banking lending goes or any sort of like business lending goes. And they really, catapulted. Talk about believing in someone, which I think is another thing I've learned throughout my career is if you have someone who's believing, like even just cheering you on behind the scenes without even realizing it, that's going to go miles further than you trying to do it on your own.
Yeah.
So I started there as a loan officer. So deals would come in, and the way their program works is deals will only come in if they are denied at a bank first. So as a business owner, you go to a bank, the bank will say you don't have 2 years tax returns, or maybe your credit score isn't where they want it to be. And then they send you to Flagship Bankable. The deals would come in, and at the time we were a really small team. I think we had maybe 7, including the CEO. It was really small. And a lot of the deals that were coming in Adam would bring them in himself. We would work on them. We had, I think, 3 loan officers, 2 or 3 of us at the time, maybe 4. It was really small. Most of us were loan officers. Yeah. And we would gather tax returns, gather all necessary, personal information, and then take it to underwriting. Underwriting would approve or deny, and then it gets introduced to a loan committee.
So what was that like? You're obviously helping basically collect all the information. What was that like dealing with the people applying for the loans? Because I'm assuming you get to meet kind of like every walk of life.
Oh my gosh, yes, it's the best. I loved it. That's when I realized that that's the field I wanted to take. I'm like, this is so fun.
Yeah.
Especially because people were already coming from a situation of hearing no, and we know that people don't like that, especially when it has to do with their business because they take it very personal. It is their baby. Yeah. So to hear no, but then we get to be a second option. Oh, it was so much fun because people then cling to you. They're excited to tell you about their story, and because of that, it made it easier to gather everything we needed, all their personal information. And usually they already had it since they've already been through the process. So it's like just handing it over to us to run with it. I was not very good at that job though. Not because of that part. I was good at that part. I was not good at the other side of it at that time, which I think Adam would attest to if he were asked. He would be so kind about it though, because he's so kind. But but I just was not, like, my mind did not work behind the scenes. Like I'm not like a solutions kind of person. Yeah. I'm more of I want to connect and figure it out. And I'm on the front line, right? So I'm hearing all these stories. I'm hearing people cry on the phone. I'm getting connected. So I'm like, we have to approve that. Like, I have to change their life. Except I go to credit and they're like, they can't afford our payment.
Yeah.
So I did that for a year. After that year, there was a need for us to have someone be kind of the face of the company or go out, because Adam was getting too busy. We were growing, and he's like, I need somebody else to do kind of the sales role. It wasn't really called that at the time. It was more, I just need someone to go out and bring in these leads, or at least talk to these leads. And all these partners that there weren't many, but the partners that we had at the time. Yeah. And he's like, Esther, I feel like you're probably the best person for the job. Is this something that you're interested in? I'm like, I asked him what I would be doing. He's like, you get to go out and like talk to people. I'm like, oh, absolutely. Yeah. Send me. So I didn't do the back end stuff anymore. I wasn't processing. I would gather documents still, but I wasn't doing the packets and then talking to underwriting or presenting to loan committee anymore. And talk about my favorite job I've ever had. Yeah. It was a blast.
Yeah, that's right up your wheelhouse.
Oh, absolutely.
So you're talking to these leads. Do you have like any like funny stories of like hearing somebody like tell you like a business idea? You're like, that's a horrible idea.
Oh, there's so many.
what's
I feel like if I sent them, they might. What if they comment on here and be like, "That was my idea. You thought that was bad."
Well, they probably need to hear it.
It was a bad one.
Okay,
there was one time this guy, which is probably still my favorite story to date. This guy wanted us to finance a Tesla to run what do they call it?
Uber.
An Uber type of company. And he was like, it's going to make sense because people will pay double the premium amount to run in a Tesla. And I'm like, people are getting Ubers to get from point A to point B because somebody else can't get them from point A to point B, or they're drunk on a Friday night trying again to get from point A to point B. I don't think anyone cares what they're writing in. No. And he was so passionate about it that it was hard in the moment to be like, we're not financing a Tesla, period, because it's not a cheap car, but also you really believe that this is a good idea. But he had no money on his own. Like, he had no income on his own. He had no job. So I'm like, this is your like ticket to first get to show off a Tesla to your friends and also get some sort of income, hopefully on the side.
Yeah. It's so hard. not that I have the greatest ideas ever all the time, but
Sure.
it is hard sometimes when you hear somebody like they're so passionate, you're like,
this is not going to work.
This will fail.
Yes.
It's like, I want to open up like a paper supply company. Like, oh, okay.
Oh my gosh. Okay, Michael Scott.
Yeah, I know. Like, I really was inspired by, The Office, and I want to open my own, it's like, and I feel bad, but they're just like, sometimes you're just like, oh, like, and then you fight internally. Like, am I doing a disservice?
I
like
know,
just letting them continue on, or should I just?
But that's
be
where
like,
the numbers come in.
Yeah.
That's where I don't have to be emotional anymore. I can sit them down and say, look at how much this is going to cost you to start, and then look at how much it's going to produce based on the market, right? Then I can take all my emotion out of it and my opinions out of it, which is the great thing about being on this side. I'm very emotion driven. So when I look at a deal and I'm like, this is a terrible idea, or on the opposite end, I'm like, why are we not approving it? They're the kindest people I've ever met.
Yeah.
It again all boils down to, on paper, can this work? In 5 years, can they still afford this payment if interest rates go up? If the market changes? If we have another COVID and need to shut down? The answer would be no. So it makes it easier.
Yeah, and it's hard too because, you don't want to say like great or good, but it's just like, you could approve a loan for somebody that it really maybe was pretty risky, and then 5 years, then they have, like, I know, talking with people who have owned businesses and have failed, it's like one of the worst experiences, and even though you have a period of mourning of not being able to do something, or it's like, it's probably better than the actual eventual demise.
I know.
The thing you're trying to create.
That's what I wish I could say that. I can't be quite that frank with people, but I'm like, I'm saving you from yourself, right? Like, this is going to be better for you now if I tell you no, or maybe not right now, or work on this and this, than it would be if you went through and lost everything.
You know what, though? If you're in business, you need people who are going to be pretty like straightforward. True. And like for me, that's like my wife. I have like a new business idea like once a week.
Oh my gosh.
And I'll be like, what do you think about that? She's like, that's a horrible idea.
Yeah, no.
You should never do that. Never
Don't tell
think
anyone
about that
but me.
idea. I'm like, okay. Maybe
Thanks, babe.
Maybe I can repackage it. It'll be fine.
Right. That's why mentors are good too.
Yeah, I would say like 1 in 10 are like, oh, that could be something.
Now I'm like curious to what they all are.
No, there's too many. Too many, and I am focused on
to be just a little bug in your brain. The amount I would pay to just sit inside all those files, constantly going in your brain.
No, I don't think you would like that. So you're at Flagship Bankable doing that. What are some like good skills that you learned during that job?
Oh my gosh, everything. I feel like most of what I know now, I learned at that job. There was no program to what I was doing. There was no role guideline. I got to build it up, which was so much fun, but I got to build it up as I also grew. So every system, we used to do things on Excel sheets because there was no program like there is now to be able to keep track of every partner that we worked with, how many deals they sent in, how we rewarded them for those deals that they sent in. So I learned being self-motivated is key. Again, anybody can learn anything, but sometimes that means you have to teach yourself. Like in this type of role, I'd been in roles before where somebody had already been there before me, right? And they could teach me how to do it. But in that role, no one had been there before me. Yeah. So I had to teach myself. I had to look for ways to make it work that others would then get to use those skills after me. Being able to Google and learn and be like, okay, how do banks keep track of their clients? And then being able to implement some sort of system. Googling how to be a salesman. I had no idea how to go out and convince a bank to be my partner, how to convince these bankers to say, hey, we can't do it, but here's someone who can. How do I convince them that I'm the right person to go with, the right company? Yeah. So just taking time and Googling that and learning it myself was, I learned now that that's going to carry on to the rest of my life.
So let's say you have someone you're going in to meet. Do you feel like it's just a natural ability to be able to talk to people, or are you game planning at all? Like, do you do research before you go into a meeting to like know kind of where to lead a conversation, or do you feel like it's more of like a natural gift?
Oh, I love this question. Mainly because when I talk to any of my friends or many of my friends and I tell them what I do, they're like, yeah, of course you do it. It has to come naturally for you. And I'm like, no, it's something that I've worked on my entire life without realizing it. Yep. But now I can kind of water it down to like pinpoints that I do almost with every interaction to connect with people, because as much as I do want to know everything about everyone, it doesn't work like that, right? I can't do that. but there's still some sort of, I don't want to say formula, but there's kind of a formula of how to connect and how to have relationships. I think it's just, again, a skill that you learn and having someone be able to teach it to you. So I think maybe some part of it has to be genuine. Like if you are naturally a person that likes people, then sure, it comes easier. But I think we aren't necessarily taught how to be relational. And I think that's something you can learn. I think parts of it are being prepared. If I'm going into a specific bank to go talk about their products, I should probably look up who I'm going to be talking to.
Yeah.
What are their highlights? What do they do really well? And then what don't they do really well? And how can I be of service in that area? And then also, people love talking about themselves.
Oh, yeah.
Let them talk about themselves. Mm-hmm. This is something that I have learned very early on as a child. My dad used to say this. He was like, people love being the center of attention, even if they think they don't.
Yeah.
We like sharing our stories. So I have learned, again.
Why do you think I have a light behind my head?
Yes, because of this. Yeah. So seriously, I do the same thing when I'm meeting with partners. It's the same thing as in any connection you're going to build. People are going to feel so much more connected to you if you let them be themselves. Yeah. If they feel like you're the one, you're talking too much and they have to almost impress you, then it doesn't feel authentic, right? We don't feel comfortable. It feels more transactional. But if you let them be the ones to guide the conversation, they're going to feel at home and they're going to want to keep talking to you.
Okay. So to alleviate small talk, I hate small talk.
Yeah, same.
To alleviate small talk when you go into these meetings, do you have any go-to questions that you'll whip out? You're like, oh, this is old trusty, old reliable. Do you have any, like you walk in, do you have any questions that you like to ask to kind of set the tone for like a meeting?
I do. And you can't laugh at me because I have a lot. I have so many questions I have that I whip out, but it's mainly just to calm things down. I think when you walk into a meeting, especially a meeting, you know, that you're either going to be sold to or there's some sort of motive behind, it's a little bit of high tension, you know, everyone feels a little uncomfortable. So my goal is to bring that down and just be like, we're all just people trying to do our jobs. Okay. It's not that deep. So I usually ask, or not, it depends. I have a lot of them, but vacation, I just be like, did you go on any vacations recently? Or like, what's that? You know, you sit down, you start talking, introduce names, trying to do the small talk. And then I ask the vacation question. Cause I mean, who doesn't love talking about where they went when they're not at work? Let's be honest. So that usually gets people at least comfortable enough to where they're letting their guard down. And it's like, okay, you just told me about something pretty intimate, you know, where you went on vacation and spent time with your money and family and friends. And then that can open the door for, now you trust me because I told you the same thing back. And now we can start building that connection. Yeah,
I like that. I think never answering when someone asks, hey, how are you doing? Like never answering that good. Be like, hey, I'm doing good. And then giving a little piece of why you're doing good or I'm doing okay. Yeah, I had kids in the morning. And then reciprocating that question and kind of like passing the ball over. Hey, like, you have any kids? You married?
Yes.
You know, and they're like, oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Something that's very, very relatable. And kind of humanizes you is super helpful. But I like that.
That's just bring it down to the same level. Yeah. That's what people want.
So vacations, any other, what's some other go-tos?
That was a pretty good one. Usually it's like relating to one way or another how they did. But that doesn't always work if I'm working with someone that's very closed off and won't offer a lot to me. So that's why I try to dig a little deeper on something that it's like, I know that this can steer you the other direction. Or if I see what they drive, if we like both came in at the same time, that's a good one too. Like, I've been wanting that car for a while, or like, what do you think about that?
Yeah. Again, finding like relatable. Yeah. Cause you can actually tell, I think how people dress, you can tell like, oh, they take this, like how they look means a lot.
Yeah.
Like I like to like do small like compliments like, oh, are you like a J. Crew model or something?
Oh my gosh. You didn't tell me that when I came in.
No.
Where do I put in a complaint?
I don't think Zach likes me.
I think he's mad at
me. But I think doing like an over the top.
Yeah, people like that.
You know, not like, I think it's bad. If you're patronizing, it's bad. But if you go like over the top, like, oh, like, how long have you working at
being complimented?
I think if you're like funny too, like trying to like, oh, how long have you working at J. Crew? They're like, what are you talking about? Oh, just like,
see, I'm not funny.
Sick shoes.
I can't. I have no advice there.
And you kind of have to read the room too, because you get into like meeting with people who are just super professional down, you know, you can go into different meetings and kind of gauge the room. But, and, you know, I think we had talked about The Office earlier, and I was thinking about your transition from Star to bankable flagship, where you're basically selling to people who are giving you leads. You're not selling to the individual person anymore. You're selling to like organizations. And it's like when Michael Scott, like, is going head to head with the other salesperson. He ends up like recruiting him. He's like, the salesperson sold to the other salesperson. It's like, it's another tier up.
Yes.
Another tier up of professionalism. And I think relationships mean more the higher you go up in that ladder. And can you talk a little bit about what that transition is? And then how are you, let's say you get to a meeting, meeting goes well. What are your methods of following up and making sure that that meeting is successful? Because you can have a great meeting, but if there's not follow-up and then there's not a back and forth after that, it's pointless.
Oh, absolutely. That is also one of my key points that I learned at Bankable. It's like I went through so many different stages of learning to do follow-ups where it was, okay, I'll follow up once every 6 months. No, they're going to forget about me. They're not going to know who I am the next time I reach out. Or if they do, I'm in distant memory and they don't really feel connected to me anymore. Yeah. So figuring out that, and again, this will be different in every field, right? Every industry is going to have different types of touch points, but figuring out how to make the perfect follow-up, I think is so crucial to every company. I mean, everybody, because we're all, again, just looking for ways to connect, right? Looking for ways to cross paths with someone else. I think the best way is always following up with an email. I don't know if you want specifics, but I always follow up with an email after any meeting. Then they have me in their inbox. They have they have a call from me, something to be able to reference when I do reach out again. They'll be like, how did I know her again? And then they have this email from me that's like, hey, it was so good to meet you at such and such place. It's so good to reconnect. Thanks for having lunch at such and such. So almost giving them like a cheat code for the next time I reach out in case they might have forgotten me or it might have slipped their mind.
That's interesting. So basically giving them like context and like, oh, it was fun talking about this. And that's interesting. So like, let's say you send that email and you don't get a reply. This is a question. I'm curious if people do the same thing I do.
Sure.
I almost never send another new email. I almost always, if I don't get a reply, I will resend, like, find the sent message and send it so it has like multiple numbers. Is that what you do, or do you send a new one?
No, I send a completely new email.
Okay.
Only because I learned, and this might be very niche, but only because I learned that sometimes, especially Google at the time, would filter emails that would come from a nonprofit. So the more emails you sent, it like made you somehow more real to the system. So if I sent that same email chain, it didn't, I don't know, it rejected it. If they already rejected it the first time, that same chain is going to get rejected. So I would do a new email, and that just, I mean, old habits die hard. So I just send a new email every time.
I mean, hey, that's good information to find. So your time with Bankable, you were there for how many years?
I think it was 4 or 5 years.
4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
So that's the longest period of your career. It's obviously a nonprofit. I know you've always been really motivated. Well, what kind of made you take the step out of that into your next portion of your career?
Yeah, that's a good question because I was not planning on leaving. I loved working there. I loved the people I worked with. I think I was looking for something different. I guess I wasn't looking. Options were presented to me that were different, and I didn't really know if I was ready for them. Again, kind of wondering if I was fit and if I had the skills, and having that conversation with Adam, who had been a great mentor at the time. Throughout all those years, I had situations presented to me, and he was a great mentor of like, this is what we can do, and this is the skills you're going to build here, and this is what probably is going to happen over here. This is what they've promised you. Like, let's talk about the pros and cons of what options are better, which I will, again, never be able to repay him for because it was great advice, great mentorship. But that time he was like, I think this is the right time for you to go. Like, all the skills that you've built here have kind of been leading you to this. So
I think that's what's hard with a lot of non-for-profits. It's kind of like a stepping stone for many people.
Yeah.
Or it's an ending stone.
Right.
Like, I think it's a great place for,
you've done all of this. You're like, okay, finally I found my,
this is how I'm going to give back and still like be in the workforce.
Yes.
A little less, so much performance driven and more community driven.
More community. Yeah. I agree. And I was on the other end of that where it was like I was learning so rapidly and getting all these skills that it's like, okay, I think I've done what I can do here now. Let's see what else I can do. Yeah. And that's when I ended up moving in, I think it was 2021.
So middle of COVID.
Yeah, it was like right. We had just come back to the office. I was there a month.
Oh, wow. So basically, talk a little bit about what you moved on to and then what you kind of learned in that role there.
So then I worked at the next place for a year. That was hard money lending. So it's like really short term, high interest rate, same type of idea of where banks can't lend. So they send you somewhere else for a short amount of time and then be able to go back to the bank. But it was a it was actually a for-profit business. So a little bit of a different mission, but I still had kind of the same connections. I still was connecting with banks on the same level, but I wasn't competing with where I was with Bankable because they're not the same types of loans.
Yeah.
These are more quick, a lot of truckers,
like
trucking companies. Yeah, bridge loans, a lot of quick construction. We did some, again, because you're just wanting quick cash.
So you do that job, and I think that's what's interesting about banking or loans. You have a wide spectrum of, you got micro SBA loans. And it's like, this is kind of like a charity. And then you have like large corporate banking, which is like very, very professional. And then you have some gray area where it's like, I don't want to say predatory loans, but I mean, essentially it's like, oh, these are like high interest, high risk loans. Yes. And I'm guessing you don't really know it. Like from the outside, it probably looks like, oh, this is like a lending agency. Right. And then you get into it, it's like, I don't enjoy this.
Yeah. It was really hard for me. It was a great place to work. They were very flexible. I had I had 2 young kids at the time. Childcare was really scarce because of COVID, shutting a lot of childcare down. A lot of those services were shut. So it was just a really perfect timing to be in this role. So I have nothing bad to say about the company or the owner or anybody. Yeah. It was just not for me. And then again, type of situation where I'm already working with banks. So they reach out and they're giving opportunities. And that led me to go somewhere else because it was a better opportunity.
Yeah. And I think like, did you ever feel like, being a woman in the corporate industry and having kids, did you ever feel like that ever stopped you from being promoted or looked down upon, or did you feel like that was, you just were able to push through? And kind of talk a little bit about that, because I hear that come up often.
Yeah, I think this is so specific to each person only because of who your manager is or who the owner of your company is. And I got very lucky when I had both my kids to work for a company that cared a lot about family. So I never felt like it stunted my growth because the people that I worked for were very encouraging. Whatever I needed, they always supplied it. I breastfed while also worked full time. And I was also, I think, the first person in our company who did that at the time. Yeah. So, and they're very accommodated. I mean, they looked for areas for me to be able to do it. They worked with my schedule to be able to pump, and it was great. So I didn't have any. I know that there are people who aren't as lucky because there are bosses and managers and CEOs that don't care quite as much as the ones that I had, but I don't think it stopped me at all. Yeah. I made life harder.
Yeah.
But but that's in every facet of being a parent.
That's very true. So you're getting recruited by banks, and then you kind of make your transition to where you are now. Can you talk a little bit about why you wanted to make that transition, and then talk about, because you're getting really in the high level of like business banking. You talk a little bit about that transition and what's a lot different than where you were before.
Yeah, I actually interviewed at several places at the same time when I was making that transition, just because I realized the very first bank that reached out was like, I think you're ready to come into banking, which was my dream. This is what I've wanted to do since I started back in banking at Wood Forest, when I realized that you could be a business lender. And I'm like, that looks so fun. Like, I want to do that. Yeah. And having someone come up to me and say like, I think you might be ready, being like, wait, am I ready? And then wondering like, do you only think I'm ready at this one institution, or do all institutions think I'm ready? So being sought after by different places, or having different companies reach out and say, okay, we think you might be ready as well. Then getting the chance to compare all of them and their culture and their mission and what exactly every bank has a different type of business lender. So the role looks a little bit different everywhere you go. And then deciding what one fits best for me. So when I was going to all of these interviews and getting to know each company, the one that I'm at now, which I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. I'm allowed to say where I work? Oh, so I ended up going with Community First Bank ultimately because it was basically the same as working at Flagship. I loved that job, and it was very much mission and people focused. Like, we cared about working with people, and I felt like Community First Bank like bled that. Like, they really wanted to be part of the community. It's a small town bank type of feel. They volunteer so much. They give so much money to the community itself. And I'm like, I want that because that's what I enjoyed about Flagship. So I took the interview because somebody connected me. I had made connections with someone else, and just in, working at connecting for years, you ended up meeting a lot of people, and somebody made the connection. They were like, hey, they're hiring. You should interview there. And I was like, no, it's okay. I can't. Like, that's too high of a role. And they're like, no, they want to. And I was like, no, but I don't have the credentials. Like, I'm barely ready to go into banking, let alone like an like a high banking, commercial banking type of role. And like, just take the interview. And I think this was that first time I got to live out the, let somebody else tell you no. Like, I don't think I'm ready, but let's go in and see what they have to say. And I was honest. I didn't have the credit training that they were looking for, but I had the lending experience, the time in the banking industry, or working with bankers and having time in lending. And then ultimately what they said in the interview, they're like, we can teach you the credit. We can't teach you to be personable. Yeah. And that's what we need. We can't teach you to make connections. And you've already learned that. So that's a skill. That's what we're paying for, right? Like, that's what we want you here for. Yeah. And then ended up taking the job and I took a credit course to be able to get up to speed to where the rest of my peers are at, but have lived it. Yeah. I do.
So you're there, I know, just because I hear from Mary Kate and then also you, a lot different, more like accountability, performance-based. How was that? And then what were maybe some times where it's like, maybe like shocking? And then how did you react to that?
Oh my gosh, this entire first year has been a shock to my system. There's, when you're in an outside perspective, you think of what something's going to be like, and then you get there and you're like, oh, this is very different. I still enjoy it and I still love it, but this is very different and a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. Yeah. And the things I thought I would be good at, I'm learning to do better and differently. Mm-hmm. And then the things I struggled with, I was ready and motivated to grow. So there's been a lot of shocking moments where it's like, wait, I thought I was really good at sales, but this is a different type of sales, because now I'm working directly with business owners. So having to learn to have kind of pivot my conversations, and my connections are even different, right? Like I don't offer the same thing to a banker that I did now to a business owner who is, I'm going straight to the source now. So yeah, just all the learning and having moments of, you get humbled, when you're bad at something, you get humbled real quick. Oh yeah. So knowing that, hey, I'm really bad at this right now, and then seeking help, because for a long time when I started this and realizing like I am behind on some skills, I don't know how to do that. I would just stop. I just wouldn't do anything. And then realizing that that's what's going to hold me back, right? Yeah. I'm shooting myself in the foot by not asking for help, because now time's gone by that I could have been learning, but also been progressing in my career. I'm just standing still. So asking for help.
Yeah, that humility is super important. This is a story from when I was at officer training camp in Washington. And I remember, I don't know how this happened, but there was a missing block of training in ROTC that didn't prepare us. And this is basically like you go do this month-long course and you have to pass all of these sections. And if you don't pass, you get like it like completely ruins your future, like ruins the next couple of years. And a lot of times the ROTC won't let you come back in because they don't want to pay for you to go back out there and do the class. So I get there and there's this one exercise that we had never done. And I didn't know what to do. And I'm like watching it, like, and I remember we had this, he was like an ex-drill sergeant. He was the one that was grading the class. And basically in the military, there's like platoons and then there's squads, and there's different like segments. And this was like a platoon. So there's a whole different level of, instead of getting 7 people to get something done, you had to do like 30 or something like that. And I remember I got out there and I'm like, I don't even know where to start. And this drill sergeant is so angry at me.
Are they screaming at you?
More making fun of me.
Oh no, that's worse.
And it's hard when you feel like your whole future is like on. It's like, oh,
tied to this.
And I humbled myself to that guy. And I said, "Hey," and of course I was picked first.
Oh my gosh!
So I didn't even get to see. I didn't get to see what everyone else was doing. And I humbled myself, and I'm like, I'm going to be honest with you. We never got trained on this, and it was interesting. And I'm like, I will do whatever it takes. Can you just teach me now? Please. Like, please. And I go, I'll do whatever. And it was crazy. Something switched in his mind with me. Like of being this punk kid to being like, you know what? Like, I don't know if it was a mutual respect or whatever, but then he helped me. And then it's a long exercise. I mean, I think it was like a couple hours long. I don't remember. Gosh. You have to go from one point to another point and hold security and do all this stuff. And he helped me, and I like listened, and he could tell I was working really hard. And then he gave me like a passing grade when he was fully gonna fail me.
Wow.
And, I haven't thought about that in a long time.
I'm sorry to bring that up.
No,
it's therapy.
No, I think, no, it was a really important lesson. I think you learn, if you can't learn your failures, you know,
we think growing up that asking for help means that you failed, that like you should be embarrassed, but really like your scenario, he respected you because you were willing to admit you didn't know.
Yeah, and
a lot.
And I was truthful too. I wasn't making excuses. Like I don't know this.
Like I want to know it,
but it's like I'm gonna do. And I think what they were trying to see is like is leadership, and I think that humility. And I was also one of my strengths is I'm like a good team player. So like I'm all about making other people look good, you know. So I think one other huge benefit was everybody who was involved that were like, hey, so they were like helping me during that point. And these are people they're all over the country. Yeah.
Like they're not your friends.
Yeah. It wasn't like anything else like that. But the biggest piece of advice that I give people who are going into business, I go, if people don't want you to succeed, it's going to be next to impossible for you to succeed. And people want you to succeed when they think when you're helpful to others and when you're respectful and you're consistent. And I think that's one thing that's like detailed your career and your history is like you go above and beyond for people, you know, and they want you to succeed and they give you those opportunities. Like those people being like, hey, I got you this interview, you should go. Guess who doesn't get that? The person who's all about themselves and doesn't put in the hard work and doesn't build relationships with people.
I agree.
So it's like step one.
They say it takes a village, right? Like to raise. I think it also takes a village to grow, like for yourself. It's not just about raising families, but to grow yourself. Can't have that if you don't care about people.
Yeah, exactly. So you get in and what are some skills that you've honed over the last year in that position? What are some areas where you've had to grow pretty drastically?
Yeah, this is really vulnerable. I procrastinate so hard. Whenever I'm coming to a point where it's like, I don't know how to do this, or it feels really challenging, I will wait to do it when I feel more prepared. And that day never comes, right? Like you're never going to be perfect on anything. And I think, again, one of those things that we're taught when we're kids, it's like, well, keep practicing till you're perfect. And it's like, perfect may never come. And I'm waiting for perfect to come. And that's, holding me back. So something that I've talked very intensely with my manager, which again, I've gotten so lucky to have the best mentors and managers and throughout my career is how do I get out of that? How do I stop being stuck? And a big thing I learned is I have to just humble myself and say, I need help. Like it's not going to make me look stupid. No one's going to make fun of me. They're going to help me because they also care because we're on the same team. Yeah. And then I get to move forward and not be held back by this one small thing that no one's going to remember in 10 years. Yeah, that's a really good point. And procrastination, I don't know if you've experienced this, but it's like when you get to that block of like, I just don't understand. And I think a lot of people are like, well, then I think a lot of people are like, well, I'll go ask for help at that point. And I think without putting in that extra effort of, it's like if anybody remembers like in math, like algebra or whatever, when they first started, like, I just don't understand how that works. And then you just have to repackage it and work hard. And it's just kind of like the odds are eventually something's going to click. And I think if you're not doing that in your career and you're not doing that consistency and consistently, you're going to have like a much cheaper experience in your position. Because I'm sure with you, like walking through like selling, working with the businesses and then doing the loan, that whole process, there's probably a ton of stuff you're like, I don't know how to do this. Oh my gosh. Yeah. I'd never been in banking. Like this is a whole new world. Yeah. I've been in loans, which sounds like I should probably know a lot of this world, but I don't. Everybody does things so differently. And alternate lending and micro lending is very different than being inside of a bank with whole new set of regulations, whole new set of, just entirely how they do things is very different. There's deposits now to worry about. There's bounce checks to worry about, which I didn't have that before. ACHs, wires, all these things that I didn't have to worry about on the business side. Yeah. Then there's the underwriting side, which is another, speaking of things that were humbling, another thing I had to learn was juggling so many moving parts at one time. At every job I've had, there's always, right? Like everybody wears different hats at each of their roles. Everybody's doing different things. But at this high of a level with a bank, it's very different because you're everybody for you're everything for someone, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm everything for this business banker. So I'm trying to figure it out. And there's a team obviously that does a lot more of the back end stuff, but I'm the face.
Yeah.
So I need to figure it all out for them or be looking for someone to figure it out so that I can get them an answer. So learning how to do that was also very humbling this year. Prioritizing, learning what to prioritize. And again, it's just asking questions and getting help.
Yeah, I was curious. So to kind of transition, this is kind of a macro banking question. Mm-hmm. I fortunately am in businesses where we're really debt adverse. We don't have really almost any debt. But I've heard kind of whispers and stuff of like, I think maybe people who don't own businesses, they think like, oh, a business loan, it's capped. Whatever you had it at, it's capped. No, like almost every commercial loan is a balloon, meaning you might have like a fixed for a few years, but then it just goes to market rate. Are you anticipating like some fallout from like the drastic increase? So all these loans during COVID that were 3% now going up depending on what your points you're paying on top of market rate are. Are you seeing like any panic, or are you seeing like any industry that you feel like are really going to get hurt because of that?
Yeah, we're already seeing it now. Yeah. So a lot of the loans that were, maybe I shouldn't say a lot, but some loans that were created during that 3%, 4%, 5%, even early 5%, all of those, if you do a commercial loan, at least, I don't know how it is at every bank, so I guess I can only speak for where I'm at right now, but if you do a commercial loan, a commercial real estate mortgage will only last for 5 years, and then it'll need repriced. So some of those are coming up on 5 years, which means we're setting new rates for those. And the rate is very different than what they did at that 3-4% back then. And yeah, people aren't so happy about it.
Well, yeah, and it's hard.
I get it.
Yeah, I think it's hard. Like, how do you anticipate that? And I talk about, I call them like TikTok real estate investors. Like, oh, put 2% down. 2% down.
With no actual knowledge.
Leverage everything. But none of them talked about adjusting rates.
Yeah, this.
And all these people that are like, oh, it's cash flowing $50 a month. Look at me. It's like, not
if
anymore.
The rate, not if the rate jumps up 3 times.
Yeah,
of what it was originally.
And
4
banks
times.
And banks can't do anything. And rates probably will go back down.
Sure, it feels like we're calming down.
Yeah, it'll probably go back down to like, probably for commercial, it used to be previous to COVID, and correct me if I'm wrong, like 6-7% was like a pretty decent rate.
It was lower than that. It was like 5.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like
great.
Yeah, I don't know if it's ever going to get back to even that low.
I don't think it'll ever get back to that low either.
For a while.
I don't think so either. But it seems like historically 8%, 8 to 9% is like pretty average. Exactly. So I think we'll probably land here.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to go up too much more.
Yeah. And I just think like to encourage people, hey, make sure you understand like just because you get them in a lot of banks, I'm not saying your bank, but they'll have these, oh, we'll start you out at 3%. And then you read the fine print. It's like, but after 3, 4, 5 years, it goes to market.
Sure.
And I think people just need to be so careful.
I know. Ask questions.
Yeah.
Use your connections. Use your mentors. Make sure you know what you're getting yourself into.
So in each segment, I like to ask some more personal questions. So you're a mom of 2. Mm-hmm. You have a really demanding job. Your wife. What do you do, or what disciplines do you do to fill your tank? So that could be exercising or reading or journaling, sleeping, who knows? What are some disciplines that you have that are able to kind of keep you on the right track? Yeah,
that's a great question. I have 2. I mean, sleeping when I can, right? Like as much as I can, since I do have young kids and a whole life. But reading is a passion of mine. I got away from it for years. And then January of last year, I started getting back into reading, and I realized how enjoyable that is because I get to take my brain out of my real world and get into another world and then kind of remove myself from the stress of life.
What are you reading?
It depends, but mysteries are my favorite. Right now I'm reading like a love story. It's called Happy Place. But usually my favorite is mysteries, and then I'll throw a love story in there to cleanse my palate and then get back to like the murder.
Yeah, I always like feel like such a loser when I'm sitting across the table. People are like, "Oh, I would like read like 3 business books a week.
And I'm like, gosh, that's amazing.
And I'm like, I'm reading like a book about dragons. I'm like reading like spells. There may or may not be wizards involved. And for me, I do read. Almost all the business books that I read are on Audible.
Oh yeah,
and that's typically like when I'm running or walking. So I do. You
can digest it easier if you can like multitask.
And that's an area I need to expand into. But for me, it's like, okay, I work all day.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about business when I'm home, and all that stuff. It's like last thing I want to do when I'm laying my head down to go to sleep is to
listen to more business.
Read a book about really good email marketing campaigns. So, but that is an area. It just seems like it's a consistent of people who are successful is reading. Mm-hmm.
Isn't it knowledge is power?
Well, this is the difference. Like even if you're not, I had this like analogy recently is. The difference between watching a show and even reading like a fantasy book or something else, it's like one is like fast food and like the one is like eating at home. Like you're still eating, you're still feeling it, but like whenever I watch TV or like I watch like YouTube videos, I just feel nasty, but at least when I read, I feel like I'm exercising.
It's almost mind numbing. Like sometimes I need the mind numbing. Like if my brain's like, I need to clock out for a second and just watch a show. It's like, that can be good and fruitful, but really what's going to be long lasting is, am I doing something for me that's long term, right? Yeah. And not only is it good for your brain long term to be reading, but also knowledge or even just like having your mind work and using your imagination, which is something we don't get to use as adults very often. So it's really good for you.
Agreed. So
that was one. There was another one.
Reading, and then what's your last one?
So I didn't count sleep, so I guess 3. And then my other one, oh my gosh, what was my other one? Oh, not hanging out with people. If it were up to me, I would be with people 24/7.
Yeah, I know.
At my job, I would be having sleepovers with all of my friends every night. All of our kids would just live in the same house.
Yeah.
But that is not, as much as I would love for that to always be fruitful, it's not. It's not healthy. You need time to reconnect and to be on your own, whether that be reading my Bible for 15 minutes or just sitting in the bathtub in silence with no screens, no book, no anything. Yeah. Just it is good. I've learned now in my 30s that it's good to be alone. It's good to have some time for my brain to not be inundated with information from the outside world or just with people in general. Even though I love it, I need a break from it because my brain needs it.
Yeah. I think that's hard because especially if you're extrovert, you're like, oh, this is kind of filling. But then you are losing like the discipline of like being alone, collecting thoughts. And like for me, I like to journal, and it might even be writing out business ideas, but writing out issues. And I ask the question consistently, like, what is wrong with me?
Aww,
No, not in a way
are
of
you
like,
okay? No, because are any of us okay?
It's not in the way of like self-pity. It's in the way of, I don't feel okay right now. Why is that? And that's the point of what it's prompting.
Like getting down to the root of what's going on instead of like masking it with something else.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so
I would agree.
To kind of end out the segment.
Oh my gosh, we're done?
Not yet. We're close.
Questions?
Last question.
I'm like having so much fun.
I know. We're having a blast. We're here in Muncie having a blast, everybody.
Come over and join us.
So yeah, to end the podcast, what is maybe a mantra or a quote or something that someone has said to you that has like stuck with you and like motivated you?
Am I allowed to say 2?
You can say as many as you want.
Do I have to be? Okay, good. I would say, I know I already mentioned one of them, but don't let yourself be the one to tell you no. Mm-hmm. There is such a large world out there, and you're comparing your like worst features. Like I would compare like the things I wasn't good at, like procrastinating or the skills I didn't have, to someone else's best, right? Like the top guy on the team. That's what I'm comparing, what I see him really good at and achieving all those goals. But reality is that they had struggles just like I do. They had to learn just like I do. So let somebody else tell you no. Go after those chances. Yeah. And if they say no, then use those. Ask why, and then use that as a learning point.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to hear no, because it's not bad. It just means maybe later. You just have to tweak a couple things. My other one is, I kind of alluded to it, but people say knowledge is power, but I really think connections are also power. Yeah. I graduated with a general math degree, and that I barely used it. So I have a lot of knowledge on it, but I've barely used it. What I've really used is the people that I've learned along the way and building connections and then keeping up with those connections and building enough of them to where people, people end up being like, yeah, let me help you here. Or if I have a connection, I'll be like, oh yeah, I know so-and-so is hiring. Let me help you because I've built connections. So get out there, build connections, meet people. You'll never regret it.
Yeah.
No.
Well, thanks so much for being on. I'm so excited to see where your career ends. I know you're going to be very successful.
Thanks for having me. This was so much fun. And hopefully it was helpful to our business owners out there.
Yeah.